Hello, GEOG 8 students. This is your instructor, and we're going to be talking this morning about South Asia. And South Asia, of course, is anchored by the country of India. We'll talk about a few additional countries as well. A classic quote from Mark Twain about this mysterious and very old civilization. Here we see the 5 regions of the realm. This is one realm that is defined physiographically by the presence of the great Himalayan mountain range, which isolates it from the rest of the continent. The concept of the subcontinent indicates that this section of Asia was previously separated from the continent. And we continue to see earthquake activity and ongoing uplift of this highest mountain range on Earth. There are a few additional mountain ranges that are associated, including that indicated. One of the defining physiographic elements of the region is the monsoon, and this is a satellite image that shows this major cloud formation that is bringing abundant rains. And you can see some of the benefits and some of the negative effects that come along with these defining climatic conditions. A little bit more about the specific climate conditions that produce this heavy rainfall. You'll notice that this is a seasonal process in which winds bring moisture-laden low pressure associated with the ITCZ, and as those winds come along gaining moisture and evaporation, they encounter the Great Himalayas, which contains the clouds and produces this abundant rainfall condition. You'll notice that this is affected much more in the east than in the west, which has desert conditions. And on the leeward side of the Himalayas, we're going to have a rain shadow desert. So if one looks at the distribution of food production, we can see that rice, which is a wet crop, is associated with the eastern parts of the country, and then we see some crops such as millet that are going to be more associated with dry conditions. Wheat likes colder conditions, so as we move further away from the Tropic of Cancer in the north and into the higher elevations, we'll see those crops present. We'll talk a little bit about India's economy and cultures. India is a place of great contrast today, where you have very modern, especially high technology, computer science, medicine, some of the most advanced educational institutions and companies that are providing these services. And then you have many people that are still working on the farm, very traditional, low equipment, low technology input types of farming, and then also factory work, but very different from what we might see in the West in terms of the type of technologies that are being used, the sort of safety measures that we take for granted in the West. Okay, so Gandhi is the sort of father of modern India, if you will, a great historical figure. And Gandhi's movement overthrew, in effect, the great British Empire. and led to the independence of India. He failed, however, to keep India intact as it existed during the British, and consequently we see Pakistan, that was initially divided before Pakistan and Bangladesh became independent countries in 1971. And there was great human suffering that resulted as a consequence of this partition. This is a very old civilization, a 4,000-year-old civilization, and so we're going to see some of the consequences that are associated with, go back to my slide here for a moment. Pardon me, I'll catch back up to where I was. So because you have this very long history, as with sub-Saharan Africa, we're going to see a very high degree of linguistic diversity. English is widely spoken as a result of the long history of the British in India, but you can see a wide array of languages, including the dominant Hindi language. This is a very religious culture, religious society, and we see a number of languages that, or excuse me, a number of religions that trace their origin to India. You can see the list at the bottom of the page there. And Hinduism is going to be the predominant religion within India, and as you can see, Nepal as well, with Islam dominating in Pakistan and Bangladesh. Buddhism has a very strong presence as well. And then we have a variety of other religions, including Christianity. Remember that Mother Teresa was from India. It's worth stepping back and looking at a map of religions. This is for the Western Hemisphere, and you can see the distribution of these different religions, including the significant presence of Islam within India. As I mentioned, India is a place of great contrast, significant wealth disparity, especially as India has modernized its economy, makes these contrasts between rich and poor that much more evident. Only 28% urbanized, number that's probably increasing. These numbers are changing all the time. Of course, urbanization is increasing worldwide, but this is one of the lowest levels of urbanization that you'll see in the world. In spite of this, you have many people that are moving into these cities. A major theme for this subject is population, and we'll look at a few different measures of population density. But this graph shows us that India and South Asia more generally has the highest population density in the world, second only to Japan, which of course is a much smaller area and a much smaller population. So again, just to step back a little bit and look at our general distribution of population, we can see that while India's population is reasonably uniformly distributed, you do see some pockets, notably where there are deserts present, but the Ganges River Delta in particular is going to be where you will see the highest concentration of population. And just by way of contrast, to see an area equivalent to Bangladesh shown on the map here, the state of Alabama, and how it would compare population-wise. between Bangladesh and the United States. India saw a dramatic growth in its population. If you look at this graph, you see traced through the year 2001, when India had just crested the 1 billion mark. They are currently at about 1.2 billion people, and you can see that one need only go back to 1921 to see them at approximately 250 million people, which begs the question, how do you achieve such dramatic population growth? Before we talk about that, though, we will look at age-sex pyramids, which help to illustrate the distribution of population by gender and by age. And what we can see in these two contrasting pyramids is India, a population with much of its population quite young. This is the 0 to 9-year-old proportion of the population. And you can see that it gradually tiers into a perfect pyramid, in contrast to the aging population of Japan, much larger percentage of older people, but far fewer younger people in the population. One of the primary reasons for this dramatic population growth that we saw in India was the so-called Green Revolution. Here are some of the factors that contributed. And this is a time that we will talk about a demographic transition model. This describes population changes through time. And what we saw with India prior to 1900 was a period of alternating periods of higher birth rates, but then we would see death rates that would increase dramatically as a result of famine or disease, and then you would sort of have this alternating in stage 1, and this leads to generally a low population growth. So now we see into the 19th and early 20th century, we see death rates declining, more food is available, medicine improvements, and yet birth rates stay relatively high, and so we see a population explosion. Presently, India is in stage 3. The United States, Japan, Germany all find themselves in stage 4 at this point in time, which is why their populations are slowing down and in some cases shrinking. Okay, so a little bit about several other countries aside from India. Bangladesh is a country that is, as I mentioned, formerly part of Pakistan, and this is an area that is subject to significant natural hazards, largely as a result of being in the delta of the Ganges River. Pakistan, a country that has been an ally of the United States in spite of the fact that they have been harboring terrorists that have contributed to the war in Afghanistan. This is a country that is the home of the ancient Indus civilization and is, again, a study in contrast. A gentleman that I worked with on a project at the University of Hawaii was an example of the educated part of the Pakistan population. And while many of us might view this as a somewhat radical country, note that this is an Islamic republic in the name of their country. And as I mentioned earlier, sadly, this has become a place that the Taliban and to a degree Al-Qaeda, so Islamic terrorism, did not originate in these areas, but was rather imported by the likes of Osama bin Laden from places like Saudi Arabia, developing the Islamic schools that then led to this generation of holy warriors, as they call themselves, that have undertaken various terrorist attacks. The Taliban, of course, the group that once controlled Afghanistan, is now the principal enemy of the government of Afghanistan, supported by the United States. The Khyber Pass was a critical corridor for the transport of goods and services along the famed Silk Road that connected East Asia with Europe. The country of, or the region of Kashmir deserves particular attention. This is a region that both India and Pakistan lay claim to, and has been a source of tension since 1948. And it is an area that at times many thought might actually lead to full-on war between the two countries. Both countries being nuclear weapon holding nations, and things have been reasonably calm, but there are many border disputes, including border disputes between India and its neighbor China to the north. The mountainous north includes these two countries. Many of us have heard about the trekking and tourism that takes place, particularly in Nepal. And Nepal has seen significant environmental damage, which is in contrast. They've also had this sort of ongoing political strife that's affected their trekking and tourism. Bhutan, by comparison, has been extremely isolated, but they have preserved their environment in a way that we have seen Nepal fail to do. Again, a couple from Bhutan that I worked with when I was at the East-West Center at the University of Hawaii some years back. So we start to see this reaching out to the rest of the world. A fascinating country. One for my bucket list of places to travel to. And finally, in the south, we have the country of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is a predominantly Buddhist country that was in the throes of a devastating civil war that ended about a decade or so ago. And so we gradually see Sri Lanka starting to advance and develop, but nothing to the degree that we would see in India, which has this service economy that has connected it to the rest of the developing world. Call centers, for example, are strongly associated with India, and as I said, some of the advanced training that is producing scientists, many of whom end up emigrating to the United States. So that'll wrap up our session on South Asia. We'll see you online.